Listen to a crowded room. If you pay close enough attention, you will notice a rhythm to the noise. People stepping over each other's words, sentences rushing into the air, desperate to be heard. Most people move through the world terrified of the void. They treat silence as if it is a flaw in the conversation, a crack in the glass that needs to be urgently filled with sound, with opinions, with performance. But then, there are those who do not scramble for the microphone, those who sit perfectly still while the world spins frantically around them. For a long time, society has misunderstood these people. We're taught from a very young age that volume equals value, that to be quiet is to be absent. If you are not speaking, the assumption is that you have nothing to say. Quietness is often diagnosed as a weakness, a lack of confidence, a symptom of insecurity. But there is a profound difference between having nothing to say and not feeling the need to say it. Some people speak to fill silence. Others use silence to understand. If you are someone who naturally gravitates toward the quiet, you have likely felt this friction your entire life, the pressure to perform, the subtle, exhausting demand to be more animated, more reactive, more visible. You may have wondered if something was missing in your psychological architecture. Why does everyone else find it so easy to broadcast their internal monologue? Why does the noise drain you while it seems to fuel them? To understand this, we have to look at the anatomy of attention. Loud people seek attention. They project their energy outward, casting a wide net, relying on the immediate validation of the room to tell them they exist. Their confidence is often tethered to the reactions of others. But quiet people understand attention differently. When you are not busy formulating your next sentence, you are free to process the world. A quiet person notices what loud people miss. They see the micro-expressions. They hear the slight tremor of insecurity beneath a booming voice. They notice who interrupts and who yields. While the loud person is painting the canvas, the quiet person is studying the frame. This is not a passive state. It is highly active. It is data collection. This is the hidden power of the quiet mind. Observation is a form of psychological leverage. When you spend your life watching rather than broadcasting, you develop an acute emotional intelligence. You learn to read the invisible currents of human behavior. You understand people not by what they choose to project, but by what they accidentally reveal. Of course, there are different types of silence. There's the silence of fear, the quiet of someone who shrinks because they are afraid to take up space, afraid of being judged. But there is also intentional silence, the silence of self-mastery. Intentional silence is a boundary. It is the realization that your energy, your thoughts, and your reactions are valuable currency, and you do not owe that currency to every person who asks for it.
When you realize this, your silence stops being a hiding place and becomes an anchor. Nowhere is this power more evident than in moments of conflict. Human beings are wired to mirror each other. When someone raises their voice, our instinct is to raise ours. When someone is frantic, we become frantic. But what happens when someone meets chaos with absolute stillness? It is deeply unsettling to a noisy mind. Stillness intimidates people who depend on noise. When an aggressive or highly reactive person encounters someone who refuses to elevate their pulse, who simply watches them with calm, measured eyes, a psychological shift occurs. The quiet person becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the loud person is forced to confront their own lack of control. You do not need to raise your voice to hold your ground. Emotional control is the ultimate form of dominance. By refusing to react impulsively, by sitting comfortably in the tension, the quiet person controls the tempo of the room. Powerful people rarely feel the need to prove they are powerful. But holding this kind of psychological presence carries a cost. If you are wired this way, the world is incredibly loud. The constant barrage of sensory input, the endless demands for interaction, the shallow exchanges of daily life, it is a heavy weight to carry. This is why solitude is not a luxury for the quiet mind, it is a necessity. It is not that you do not like people, it is that interacting with people requires you to translate your deep internal world into an external language, and translation is exhausting. Solitude is where the quiet mind calibrates. It is where you untangle the threads of the day, where you organize the vast amounts of data you have absorbed. When you retreat, you are not isolating, you are rebuilding the architecture of your internal confidence. Because quiet people do not constantly seek external validation, their sense of self is built on bedrock, not sand. They do not need the room to tell them who they are, because they have spent thousands of hours in solitude figuring it out for themselves. This self-containment creates an undeniable aura of mystery. Human psychology is fascinated by the unknown. When you do not give everything away, when you do not over-explain yourself or immediately fill the silence with your life story, people are drawn to you. They project their own thoughts onto your stillness. They wonder what you are thinking. By offering less, you become more. And then there is the moment you finally choose to speak. When a person who rarely speaks opens their mouth, the environment changes. Because you have not diluted your presence with endless, meaningless chatter, your words carry weight. You have spent the entire evening listening, filtering, synthesizing the information that everyone else was too busy talking to hear. When you speak, it is not a reaction, it is a conclusion, and people listen. They listen because the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful person is the one who holds the room's attention without having to demand it. If you have spent your life feeling like your quietness was a deficit, if you have ever forced yourself to be louder or more reactive just to fit the mold of a noisy world, it is time to lay that burden down. Your silence is not a void, it is a presence. It is the space where observation sharpens into intuition, where restraint turns into emotional control, where self-awareness becomes unshakable confidence. You do not need to change your nature. You only need to recognize the deep, hidden strength embedded within it. Not everything powerful needs to be loud.